Well, Bruce, I've been listening to your series this month on the dismissive-avoidant wife, and if I'm hearing this correct, you're telling me there's really no hope and divorce is inevitable. Not quite. Welcome back to the Secure Husband Podcast. Bruce Abbott, certified professional coach and founder of SecureHusband.com. You've heard a lot over this last month. I've talked a lot about the dismissive-avoidant wife and the realities that come with that. I've talked about false hope. I've talked about the defensiveness. I've talked about the criticism. It might be easy to come out of this and say, okay, if I'm hearing you correct, Bruce, this means I need to divorce my dismissive-avoidant wife if I have any chance of being happy again. The thing about relationships is it's never black and white. If you're looking for a straight answer, I'm sorry to disappoint you, but there's not going to be one. Only you can make that call. Only you can determine what your individual situation is. Let's go back a little bit. We've talked a lot about attachment theory. We've talked a lot about the dynamic between an anxious, preoccupied man and a dismissive-avoidant wife. And if you've been listening to this podcast you know that this is all nervous system based. It's all has to do with feelings of self-worth. It's that inner child inside of you. We've talked about childhood wounds. I've talked about how being able to self-soothe and regulate your nervous system is such an important element in any relationship. With all of that being said, it can be easy to see where I am maybe pro-divorce in a relationship with a dismissive-avoidant. It's not that it's pro-divorce. I like to call it pro-reality, pro-self-leadership, anti-self-abandonment. See, you can be in a loving relationship with a dismissive-avoidant wife if you're not self-abandoning. That's how these relationships begin to heal, is when you can stop self-abandoning, you can establish boundaries, you're able to regulate your nervous system. What that does is it stops the process of pushing your wife away when she is already predestined with her childhood wounds to pull away. This is being able to not push her further. If your wife already has the tendency to shut down, to distance, to deprioritize, resist intimacy, that doesn't mean that the marriage is necessarily over if you are able to bring a regulated, grounded version of yourself to the relationship. Does not mean that you have to divorce her to have peace. It means that you're no longer having to live in a fear-based situation. For some of you listening to this podcast, that is not going to work, and divorce may be an option. But for another big portion of the listeners to this podcast, you're going to be able to bring a new version of yourself, not because you spun your wheels trying harder for your wife, for your relationship. You have put in the work for you. That's that self-loving work, self-compassionate. And then you're able to bring now a grounded, regulated version of yourself into the marriage. Just get clear, understanding that dismissive avoidance does not automatically mean the relationship is doomed and that divorce has to happen. It also doesn't guarantee the marriage will heal. And I know that's that tension right there, knowing which way it's going to go. That's what most anxious, preoccupied men struggle with. Especially if you're anxious, preoccupied, you crave certainty. You crave reassurance. Attachment work rarely gives that. But what it does give you is clarity. And this is where only you can make that determination. Once you get clarity, guys don't get into relationships wondering, does she have childhood wounds? No. They only look at this after years of trying to make a marriage work. And you get clarity. Talking about it. Has it worked? Therapy. Has it worked? Self-improvement. Is it working? Only you can answer those questions. Did doing more work? Did asking less work? Did the more you try to save the marriage, the more that you disappeared inside of it? That's where the clarity is important. And understanding your nervous system is exhausted. Because you get to that point where you're asking, what am I doing wrong? But then once you get clarity and awareness, as I mentioned last time with the boundaries, what am I willing to live with? That's the more important question. If the dismissive avoidance is something that can be worked with, if you remember last time I talked about that not all dismissive avoidant traits are deal breakers. Sometimes she needs more space. Sometimes she needs more alone time. But how is it with reciprocity, mutuality? Once you see that clearly, we talked about last time with the boundaries, you're no longer seeing it and deciding from confusion. You're deciding from truth. You're deciding from what you see. So as you put in your work, what is her reaction to that? What do you see? What is your clarity? And I understand that there's, especially with the AP guys, we want to understand her better, thinking that if I understand her better, she'll change. Understanding her only helps you stop personalizing her behavior. Doesn't give her capacity for intimacy. Dismissive avoidance only heal when that person chooses the work. You can't do it for her. You're not going to love her into it or explain her into it. You're not going to make her do it. But what do you see? I talked about this last time. What do you see happening? Are you seeing progress? And if you're seeing that, be supportive. She's trying to show the vulnerability. I mentioned that last time. Well, what if you don't see any of that? What if I have gotten myself grounded, more secure, able to self-soothe, regulated my nervous system? Absolutely nothing changes. That's, again, a choice only you can answer. But I'll feel like a failure. Anxious, preoccupied men equate staying with loyalty and leaving with failure. But if the relationship does not progress, then staying while abandoning yourself is self-betrayal. It's not loyalty. It's not a proof of strength. You've already probably been in endurance mode. Both of these acts, staying, leaving, are acts of courage. And both of them can be fearful. The difference is why you choose them. That's what I come here to tell you. There's not a clear answer. That is frustrating. I get it. Come on, I just need to know, yes or no, black or white. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Sometimes not yet. Divorce becomes a realistic outcome when there are some things that are consistently true. And this is not coming from something impulsive. This is recognizing patterns. And when you put in the work for yourself, not trying harder to change your wife, putting in the work for yourself, if there is still chronic emotional neglect, there is still little to no intimacy, still distancing, still stonewalling, no accountability, no meaningful effort towards self-work, no curiosity at all about how this impacts you, you don't see any repair happening. And if you're only staying by abandoning yourself, at that point, the question really is, who am I by staying? It's not a, can this marriage be saved? It's who am I by staying? But if you see that when you put in the work, you start seeing little bits of intimacy, maybe a little reduction in that distancing, maybe there's just a little bit of accountability. As I mentioned last time, it might be clumsy. You're seeing a little bit of effort, a little bit of trying. That's her trying to be vulnerable. Attachment awareness isn't meant to push you towards a divorce. It's meant to stop you from trying harder in ways that don't work. So most of these AP guys that I work with, they exhaust themselves trying to change the marriage before they ever lead themselves. It's where you can come towards the middle from your separate sides, but you're doing that because you're leading yourself. And again, that's where the boundaries come in as just part of the structure. Because remember, the boundaries are not about controlling your wife's behavior. They're about ending the self-abandonment, clarifying what you will and won't live with. You remove that anxious pursuit from the system. You regulate your nervous system. You stop chasing. You stop explaining. You stop people-pleasing, overgiving. You stop contorting yourself. And two things will happen. You stabilize and the dynamic changes. how the dynamic changes, only you will be able to answer that. I cannot give you that answer because it's not always going to be in the way that you hoped, but it is always going to be in a way that reveals truth. That's why I always tell the guys that are trying harder. They hear lead the marriage, and so they think more emotional labor, more patience, more of the talk. That's anxiety. Leadership in a marriage with a dismissive avoidance is self-respect. It looks like calm consistency, predictability, not being reactive. You've got clear limits and boundaries, and you're not chasing. You stop performing for closeness. You start anchoring the relationship. And what that does is it allows you to guide. You're setting the tone. You're taking the lead in your marriage. You're guiding without fixing. When you stop self-abandoning, your wife is no longer being regulated by your anxiety. Remember, your anxiety is triggering those wounds and those defense mechanisms that she already has. If you're not pushing and hovering and collapsing and you become steadier, from that steadiness, one of the two paths will emerge. She's either going to step forward when your anxious pursuit is now removed and the boundaries are clear. The dismissive wife can feel less pressured, and she'll notice that emotional shift, and she begins her own self-work, and she takes those small, clumsy, imperfect steps towards vulnerability. Remember, vulnerability is terrifying for a dismissive. The progress might be slow, but again, effort, or you're going to see nothing change. And you give it a specific length of time, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, whatever. If you stop over-functioning, what becomes clear? If there's still no interest in self-reflection, no effort at all towards growth or intimacy or willingness to engage, and it stays empty emotionally, that's clarity. So does that mean stay with false hope? No. Again, what are you seeing? Awareness. What are you seeing? Are you seeing those little improvements? Well, that's not false hope. But if nothing changes, even after you change how you show up, you ask that question, that boundary, am I willing to stay in a marriage that will likely remain emotionally distant for the rest of my life as it is? Again, that's not a question anyone else can answer for you. I can't give you that answer. But it's a question you have to ask yourself. So no, I'm not automatically saying divorce is your option. It may eventually become the option. It may become the answer, but it's going to come from clarity and regulation and self-respect. You've processed the grief. You've faced the fears. And when you do it, it's not out of retaliation or panic. It's not even completely from exhaustion. It's wholeness. But I can tell you from my own experiences, for some men, once the boundaries are in place and the self-abandonment ends, the marriage starts to shift in a meaningful way. No, it's not perfect. It may not be like you guys were when you were in your 20s all over each other in the infatuation stage, but it becomes better. But more importantly, you're able to stay in it with peace, not because you're settling, but because you made a conscious choice that this marriage does not feel self-abandoning anymore. So it's not about forcing any decision. You don't have to make a decision today. You can just take some time to get clear. And maybe you have already. Maybe you're like, I have been clear for years. What have you done internally for you? Where are you at? Have you made the changes that you want to make for yourself? If you say, yes, I have, and this marriage is still feeling like it's self-abandonment, then there's your answer. But if you say, I think that I have more that I can do for me that's loving to help me regulate my nervous system, to help me feel more secure. Keep putting in that work for you, not for the marriage, not for your wife, for you. Honestly, for yourself. All of this is based on honesty, being very self-honest. Just remember that question. Am I willing to stop abandoning myself, no matter what she chooses? Do I have to divorce my dismissive-avoidant wife? What is a loving action for you? When you can answer that question, the rest of it will unfold with a lot less fear. Because then whether you stay or you leave, you're able to not self-abandon yourself. You probably pulled this podcast up looking for a clear answer. The thing is I am giving you a clear answer. You will clearly know that answer, but you will clearly know that answer. I can't tell you what that answer is. I'm sure I'm going to get some comments on this one, but just know, and I say this with love, no blame, no shame, no guilt. I know, man, you're doing the best you can, but I'm here to help. I'm here to help you guide through this crazy journey that having a dismissive avoidant wife can be. I get it, man. I've been where you're at. I hope that this podcast helped you out. If you're listening to this podcast for the first time, would you subscribe? And if you're a regular listener, would you give me a review? Maybe share this. If you've got a friend or a family member that you're like, man, I think he really needs to hear this. And if you're listening to this and you are struggling right now and are looking for accountability in this journey, I encourage you, visit securehusband.com. Just fill out the form for a free 30-minute consultation. Just a conversation to see if one-on-one coaching can help you out and hold you accountable. I'll see you on the next Secure Husband podcast. Thanks for listening.